I was Eleanor Brooks, 62 years old, and after 37 years as a probate accountant, I believed paperwork revealed people's character long before grief ever could. My uncle Harold, 89, spent 11 years quietly restoring every page of our family's estate records by hand, hanging the same old brass key beside his office safe every evening at exactly 7:00 p.m. It was his ritual, his promise that nothing important would ever be hidden. Then, at 10:03 a.m. on April 18, his heartbeat stopped, and everything he had protected became a prize. Months later, I watched a lawyer stop reading, staring at a single sentence as though he'd forgotten how words worked. What none of them understood was that the silence in that room had begun years before Uncle Harold ever signed his final will, and that one sentence had been waiting patiently for exactly that moment. In my family, the brass key became more than an object. Whoever stood closest to Uncle Harold was assumed to stand closest to his money. Holiday dinners, birthdays, even hospital visits were quietly measured against that invisible scoreboard. My cousins smiled warmly whenever Harold was watching, then compared property values once he left the room. Harold himself never played those games. He repaired antique clocks in his workshop, brewed strong coffee every morning at 6:15, and remembered every employee's birthday from the small hardware business he had sold decades earlier. I loved him deeply, yet I also normalized things I should have challenged. When relatives skipped helping him after surgery, but appeared for conversations about inheritance, I convinced myself it wasn't worth creating conflict. Looking back, I wasn't merely another victim of the system. I helped keep it comfortable. That was why I insisted everything be documented. On February 9, March 3, and March 27, Harold confirmed his estate plans in writing before his attorney, accountant, and 2 witnesses. I personally filed every signed copy and emailed confirmations to each beneficiary. No one could honestly claim confusion later. Still, my cousin Daniel leaned back in his chair after the final meeting, smiled without warmth, and repeated the phrase he always used whenever money overruled decency. "Business is business." Everyone nodded and moved on. I wish I had understood then that those 3 words were never reassurance. They were a warning. On April 22 at 9:14 a.m., my phone vibrated while I was sitting alone in Uncle Harold's study. The old brass key still hung beside the safe exactly where he had left it, catching the morning sunlight. On the desk rested the leather folder containing his final estate documents, neatly arranged the way he always preferred. My cousin Daniel's text appeared first. Asterisk, we need your signature today. No delays. Asterisk. Before I could finish reading it, my phone rang. Daniel didn't bother with condolences. Everyone agrees, he said. We're simplifying this. Sign the acknowledgement, stop asking questions, and let's move on. I reminded him that Harold had spent months reviewing every page himself. Daniel laughed softly. Business is business. The words landed harder than they ever had before. Within 15 minutes, 3 more messages arrived. One cousin warned that delaying probate would only waste everyone's money. Another suggested that I was becoming emotional because I had lived closest to Harold. A fourth sent nothing except the signature page highlighted in yellow. I looked from the glowing phone screen to Harold's polished desk. The completed estate binder sat inches away from the brass key, every tab perfectly labeled in his careful handwriting. 11 years of planning rested beside one morning of greed. The contrast made my stomach tighten. I walked through the house in silence. Every room carried some trace of Harold, his reading glasses on the kitchen counter, a half-finished crossword dated April 17, the faint scent of cedar from his workshop. Yet the people calling me weren't talking about the man who had lived there. They were already dividing the space into percentages. The realization hurt because it wasn't new. Suddenly dozens of moments rearranged themselves inside my memory. Daniel missing Harold's 75th birthday because he was too busy, yet arriving within an hour after hearing Harold had invested in another commercial property. Family dinners where someone always steered the conversation toward appraisals. Christmas mornings when gifts were quietly compared against future expectations. Every small betrayal had seemed isolated. Now they fit together like pages from the same file. And I had helped make it possible. I had changed subjects to avoid arguments. I had excused selfishness as stress. I had told Harold more than once, their family. They'll come around. They never did. The hardest part wasn't realizing they had failed him. It was admitting I had spent years helping them avoid the consequences of that failure. Looking for someone to tell me I wasn't overreacting, I called my older sister, Margaret. She sighed before I even finished explaining. "Eleanor, don't make this into a thing," she said gently. "People grieve differently. Money just makes everyone nervous." An hour later, I met my cousin Peter outside the courthouse. He shrugged. "Daniel's pushy, sure. But if everyone else is signing, why not let it go? Fighting will only divide the family." As if we weren't already divided. I drove away feeling smaller than I had always. That evening, I stopped by my longtime friend Linda Alvarez, who had known Harold almost as long as I had. She listened without interrupting, then quietly placed a cup of coffee in front of me. When I finally finished talking, she looked directly at me. "You don't owe people protection from the consequences of their own choices." No one else had said anything remotely like that. For the first time since Harold died, I felt something steadier than anger. I felt permission. The next morning, I drafted one final proposal. I emailed every heir, offering to postpone the estate filing for 7 days so anyone with concerns could meet together with Harold's attorney, review every document, and ask every question. No accusations. No penalties. No lawyers on opposing sides. Just one honest conversation. Daniel replied exactly 18 minutes later. Asterisk, absolutely not. Sign the papers today. Asterisk. Then he called. "You have two choices," he said. "Either cooperate, or everyone will remember you as the woman who destroyed this family over money. We'll challenge everything, drag this through court for years, and when it's over, don't expect invitations to birthdays, weddings, or holidays." He paused just long enough to make sure I understood. Then, almost casually, he repeated the words that had become his favorite shield. "Business is business." At that moment, I finally understood something Uncle Harold had known long before I did. Daniel wasn't protecting the family. He was protecting what he believed the family owed him. The next morning, I stopped trying to earn fairness from people who had already decided fairness was negotiable. I made one decision before I touched another piece of paper. I would no longer fight for a better place inside a broken family system. I would simply stand outside it. Uncle Harold once told me that every estate file eventually became a mirror. "People think a will distributes money," he had said while locking the safe with the old brass key. "Most of the time, it distributes character." I finally understood what he meant. I left every chair at the attorney's conference table exactly as it had been arranged, including Daniel's. His place remained open because I wasn't trying to exclude anyone. If someone chose not to sit there, that decision would belong to them, not me. A thought settled quietly into my mind. You stop being controlled the moment you stop negotiating against your own peace. Before the final filing, I decided every beneficiary deserved one last update from me. I opened a blank email and began typing. The first draft lasted less than 3 minutes. Asterisk, you've spent years treating Harold like a checking account instead of a human being. I hope every dollar slips through your fingers. Asterisk. I stared at the screen. It felt satisfying. It also sounded nothing like the person Harold had trusted. I deleted every word. The second draft wasn't much better. Asterisk, you'll understand what you've done when it's too late, and none of you deserve what's coming. Asterisk. That one disappeared even faster. Anger was asking me to perform. Harold had taught me to let facts do the work. I started over one final time. Asterisk, the estate documents will be executed exactly as Uncle Harold instructed. Every beneficiary has received the same information, the same opportunities for review, and the same timeline. I genuinely hope each of you finds peace with the outcome. I have nothing further to add beyond honoring his wishes. Asterisk. I read it twice. No accusations. No predictions. No argument. I press send at 8:42 a.m. Daniel answered 6 minutes later with a message only 4 words long. Asterisk, see you Monday. Business is business. Asterisk. For the first time, those words didn't make my pulse rise. They sounded strangely small. The estate reading began on Monday, May 6th at exactly 2:00 p.m. in attorney Michael Lawson's conference room overlooking Jefferson Square. 8 beneficiaries filled the polished walnut table. Expensive watches flashed beneath bright lights. Coffee cups sat untouched because everyone was too busy calculating what they expected to receive. No one mentioned Harold's kindness. No one mentioned the thousands of mornings he opened his hardware store before sunrise. No one mentioned the veteran scholarships he funded anonymously for 15 years. The conversation stayed fixed on property values, investment accounts, and percentages. Michael began reading the will in his measured voice. The first several pages unfolded exactly as everyone expected. The lake house, the investment portfolio, the downtown commercial building. Each name appeared where people believed it should. I watched shoulders relax around the table. Daniel even smiled before exchanging a confident glance with my cousins. They thought the hardest part was over. Then Michael reached the final sealed page. I recognized the envelope immediately. Harold had placed it into the file himself on March 27, locking it beside the brass key before looking at me and saying only one sentence. Asterisk, this page isn't for today. It's for the day they believe they've already won. Asterisk. Michael carefully broke the seal. He read the opening line. Then he reached the next sentence. His voice stopped. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Nearly 20 seconds passed without a single sound. Daniel leaned forward. "What is it?" he asked. Michael looked up, visibly shaken, before reading the sentence exactly as Harold had written it. Asterisk, if Eleanor Brooks signs the estate acknowledgement without objection or litigation, every beneficiary who demanded immediate execution shall be deemed to have voluntarily accepted distribution under Article 9, thereby permanently relinquishing all claims to the Brooks Family Preservation Trust, presently valued at $14.8 million, which shall instead be transferred in equal shares to the Harold Brooks Community Foundation and its named lifetime trustees. Asterisk. No one moved. Daniel's confident expression disappeared before the lawyer finished the last word. For the first time since Uncle Harold died, business was no longer business. Truth had become the only thing left in the room. The meeting ended without anyone raising a voice. Shock has a way of draining volume from a room. 3 days later, Daniel arrived at my house unannounced at 4:18 p.m. His expensive suit was wrinkled for the first time I could remember, and he stood on the porch without knocking again after the first attempt. I saw him through the window and finished watering the roses before opening the door nearly 12 minutes later. For years, he had controlled every conversation by making everyone else rush. This time, he waited. He tried his familiar approach first. "You know this isn't what the family expected." I simply nodded. Then he reached for guilt. "People think you've turned everyone against each other." That no longer had any power over me. Finally, his shoulders dropped. The confidence disappeared, leaving only a tired man who looked much older than 51. He asked the only honest question I had ever heard from him. "Do you think Uncle Harold stopped loving me?" I let the silence answer before I spoke. "My condition has nothing to do with me," I said. "Before we discuss money, apologies, or the future, you need to spend one afternoon with Martha Jenkins, the woman who cared for Harold every weekday for the last 6 years. Listen to what his life was actually like. If you can respect the person who stood beside him when no one else did, then we can talk." Daniel didn't argue. The following week, he met Martha. The most important conversation happened afterward, behind the closed door of Harold's old workshop. I never asked for the details, and neither of them volunteered them. I only know that Martha came out with tears in her eyes. Daniel came out carrying the old coffee mug Harold had always used, and something inside both of them had shifted. 6 months passed. The Brooks Family Preservation Trust had already funded its first 12 scholarships for local trade school students and restored the community workshop Harold had dreamed of opening. On the first Saturday of every month, family members, neighbors, and scholarship recipients gathered there for breakfast before volunteering together. Nobody sat at a head table anymore. Nobody ranked themselves by inheritance, careers, or status. Daniel came regularly. He was never the first to speak. One quiet morning, I watched him arrive early, pick up the old brass key from its display beside Harold's framed photograph, polish it with a soft cloth, and place it back exactly where it belonged before anyone noticed. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't need it. Martha had become chairwoman of the Foundation's volunteer committee, smiling more easily than she had in years. Watching young apprentices learn woodworking in Harold's restored shop was the future he had always wanted, and she often said the building finally sounded alive again. People sometimes ask whether I regret handing the greedy heirs exactly what they wanted. I don't. Because Uncle Harold never designed that final sentence to punish anyone. He designed it to reveal them. The old brass key still hangs where everyone can see it, but it no longer protects money. It protects a memory. And if this story taught me anything, it's this. The strongest inheritance isn't what people receive when someone dies, it's the truth they're forced to face when greed believes it has already won.